Hello, in this video I'm going to show you a little bit about basic glazing. The first thing we're going to do is make sure we plan our colors. So I just pointed out where each of my glaze colors are going to be. That way I can keep track of what I've done and how many coats I have and all of that stuff. My project that I have right here has some underglaze inlay in here, which I've shown in a different video. So that's where all the black is coming from. But to get started, we need to brush our crumbs off of the project using a dry brush. You can wash it in the sink too, you just have to make sure that it's fully dry. Next, you're going to take whichever glaze you're starting with and stir it. You want to be careful not to shake it because sometimes the lid's not on all the way and that can cause a disaster. Now we're going to start by applying our glaze. You'll need 3 even coats and we need to let it dry completely between each coat. We'll know it's dry because it won't be shiny and it is also going to have this sort of chalky finish to it. Make sure that the coats are relatively thick. If they're too thin, you're going to see the brush strokes later. Make sure you're keeping track of the number of coats. Usually I just make like a tally mark next to my labels. And we just keep adding coats as things dry. We also want to make sure that we're coating everything. We don't want to leave any open spaces. So make sure you're always kind of tilting your project so you can see it from every angle. If you get any glaze in areas where you don't want them, you can use a sponge or a wet paintbrush to kind of scrub the glaze off. And I always tend to work on a few areas at a time, so different colors in different spots while I'm waiting for certain things to dry. That way I get a lot more done as I'm working. So again, we're switching colors while we're waiting for things to dry. Don't mind my classic kiddos in the background. And you may notice I'm using a variety of different brushes. Basically, choose the right brush for the job. So if you're doing tiny detail work or you need to get into an area that's hard to reach, you probably want to use a smaller brush so that it works better for you. Like big brushes don't really work well for details. And I also find it easier to work in the harder to reach areas first and then move into the areas that are a little more wide open as I'm working. That way it's easier to clean up if I make a mistake. And here you can see I'm layering a different color over the top of the glaze that I put down. So some colors layer really nicely, others don't, so it's always very important to test it first. I usually do test tiles. Sometimes they look really beautiful, sometimes it looks like burnt casserole. Usually when I'm doing these more detailed areas, I always want to make sure that I have a really crisp edge between two colors, so I don't really want them to overlap much because that tends to look kind of muddy, or you know, like if you put wet watercolor next to wet watercolor, how it bleeds together. Glaze can do that too sometimes, so it's important if you want to have a crisp edge that you make sure that your glaze just lines up right next to one another and not overlapping a lot. And then to finish things off, we always want to make sure that the bottom is cleaned off. So anything that's touching the table needs to get cleaned off so that it doesn't stick in the kiln. And once it's clean, we'll throw it in the kiln and we'll wait 24 hours and voila, we have a glazed piece. As you can see, a lot of the colors that I put down looked pretty different from how I painted them on because the glazes undergo a chemical change in the kiln. So always read the labels and use your test tiles to choose your colors. Thanks for watching.